Podcast.
Welcome everyone to another episode of Newbie Dice on video and podcast format. Today I have two guests with me. First up, we have Kwanjun. Say hello.
Hello.
Also better known as KJ. He's one of our local players and he recently won a local tournament that I just ran. Next up, we have the infamous Felix Castro.
Not sure if infamous, but sure. Yeah. Hi, everyone. Like we said, Felix Castro.
All right. Yep. All the way from the US. And today we do have a topic that I would like to talk about, which is to put the fantasy back into fantasy gaming. Sometimes we play the game, it becomes too mechanical and chess-like. So how can we improve our experience by having fantasy back into fantasy gaming? And I would like to thank my two co-hosts for coming on such short notice. Okay, a little bit self-serving because I haven't put out content in a while because I was actually quite busy preparing for the tournament. And I realized I'll be flying to the US for 3 weeks to the West Coast. And so I don't think I'll be putting up content for 3 weeks. So here we have the ideas have been percolating in my head for a while, but I'm just sort of going to collapse them all together, talking about the tournaments that we just ran. I just ran and Felix has just ran a tournament as well, and then talking about the main topic. But before that, let's have some player introductions. Let's start with Felix. I know many people know who you are, but just give us a short intro.
Well, fortunately or unfortunately, yeah, people know who I am, but I'm from Dayton, Ohio, so kind of middle-ish America, Midwest for those from the states that know where the Midwest is. Yeah, I've been playing Kings of War for about, eight years now. Mm-hmm. So that's one of those you think you'd be pretty good at it at this point, but still middle tables for the most part.
King of the mid tables.
King of the mid tables. I've been trying to push that title for me for a hot minute. But yeah, that's kind of my origin story in terms of playing Kings of War. I actually started playing when I lived in Maryland. Jake Cherapika, for those that know him, was actually my first game of Kings of War, like ever. And then I moved like 2 days later back to Ohio. So
goodbye, farewell.
Got to play him once and then left. But yeah, so yeah, that's all I got.
Yeah, another humble piece of information is that Felix is part of the RC, the rules committee, who helps tweak the rules and make the game enjoyable for everybody. And he's definitely speaking on behalf of the mid-table players as well. But of course, he is doing his best to win tournaments, not trying to stay on the mid-tables, right?
Yeah, that being mid-table was kind of what got me on the RC, because well, I mean, part of it is that, yeah, I mean, it's cool to tune the game for that top 10% or whatever that are those top table players. But you got to remember there's 90% of the rest of the tournament that's not at the top tables. So you can only service the top 10% for so long before the entire community falls apart because people stop having fun and stop going to tournaments. And then when it's all just top table players, tables tend to shrink. Tournaments tend to shrink.
That's right. Because sometimes, you could say, oh, this list build or this unit isn't a problem for top table players because they know very well how to handle this problem, but they might be dominating the mid tables and make the experience unenjoyable for many of the mid table players. So these problems will also have to be looked at when we're talking about balancing the rules, not just at the top tier competition, but also for the general public. This might be a very negative play experience for some people.
Yeah, well, it's like a recent-ish example was for Scorchwings. I mean, folks at the top tables at Masters, the U.S. Masters, generally didn't have too much of a struggle against Scorchwings because they are top tables for a reason and kind of, that kind of player and kind of knew what to do against Scorchwings. But you talk about your normal 1 or 2 day tournament, you're basically a newer tournament player is just going to be absolutely wrecked by those and have absolutely no answer. So kind of have to tune that down a little bit. Not to the point they're useless, but just to take the edge off a little bit off of them. But that's a balance thing that constantly discussed within the RC is just like, okay, at what point do we, because we don't like to nerf stuff. I mean, it's not fun, especially in a game where it takes so long to paint or have people paint your units in your armies. You don't want to finally get one onto the table to find out a month and a half later it's no longer valid, because but how do you balance the game still? Because that's two competing priorities, and so it's just I can see why the guys on the RC struggle with it for so long because it's not an easy
Yeah, it's not
master.
an easy task at all. So hats off to the RC, you being one of them. So thank you, RC, for all the hard work. Nick, I'd like to just shout out to Matt Carmack also, who's recovering from a bad accident, motorcycle accident. So he's still on the road to recovery. So send him your well wishes still. All right, with that, let's introduce a new person to the channel, KJ. So he's our local player, but I'll leave it up to you, KJ, to tell us a little bit more about yourself and your origin story.
The year was 2010. So how I started was I found out Dawn of War was a miniatures game. It comes from a miniatures game, 40K, right? So I just searched on the internet, where can I find out more about it? And I ended up in a shop with a friend, and the shop was called Gameforge, which is now defunct. Oh, anyway, this is in Penang. So Penang is in Malaysia, about 800 kilometers north of Singapore.
Mm.
So I shared with a friend the Assault on Black Reach box. Yeah, so I took the Space Marine side. And for a few years after that, so this was when I was 16, for a few years I went in and out of the hobby because, with 40K rules update all the time, balances change all the time. And then basically I got table wiped a few times and then I quit and I came back because of the aesthetic. So after that, I moved to Singapore to study a few years later, and then I sort of missed wargaming, but I didn't want to get back into 40K because it was a bit ridiculous. So I searched around and found out a game called War Machine and Hordes, and that's where I met Paige as well. Yeah, so after that, I became more of a serious gamer. So after that, I think similar to Paige's story, after War Machine died, searching for another game. But in the meantime, I was doing more display painting and joining painting competitions. Yeah, so after looking around for a while, I chose Kings of War because I heard the balance was very good. It was very easy to pick up, but there's a lot of depth to the strategy, and I like the diorama building aspect. Yeah.
Do you still find it true that it's easy to play but hard to master?
Yeah, very true. It's so easy to pick up. But the problem I find with introducing new players to this game is Kings of War is not interesting under 2,000 points because you don't get to execute all the flanks and whatnot. You have very few units under the 2,000 points. So when you introduce a new player, typically is 1,000 points, and you don't really get the interesting parts of Kings of War. And I still love the diorama building aspect. Although it's quite a big project for any army, but I think it's much better hobby-wise than other games.
Definitely. KJ had a nickname when he was playing War Machine and Hordes. It's called the Butcher Tree Slut. Butcher Tree was quite a very powerful general, and it's a like what you said about negative player experience. He dominates any player who doesn't know how to deal with it. So KJ was finding easy success with it, so he's stuck with it. Yeah, but it's sometimes very demoralizing for a newer player who doesn't know how to handle it because he's just a murder machine. Yeah.
Yeah, it's quite a selfish general where he doesn't support his army, but he murders the opponent's army single-handedly. So I think I traumatized you a bit, Paige. I remember one game we had.
Did I?
Where I murdered half the army in a single turn.
Yeah, I think I sort of remember that. I was like, what? And usually when you send your general in, they'll be exposed and easy to be killed, right? But not for Butcher Tree. So
oh yeah, he has a one-off ability that makes him almost invulnerable during that one turn he goes in. So you can't really counter attack as well. So fortunately, nothing like that is in Kings of War.
Yes, definitely. Amen to that. So KJ now he has split loyalties. He is originally from Penang, but he's living and working in Singapore now. So we'll always question his loyalty. Where does your loyalty stand, KJ? Because we did have the Clash of Kings Asia, which was Singapore, Penang, and Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia.
Right.
The three groups. And we always tease him about it. Well, one last thing
Yeah.
I'd like to ask KJ is about your commission painting. So how did that interest sort of take off?
Oh,
Or display painting and commission painting?
yeah. So after I started display painting, after War Machine died, I started posting my stuff online. So one one local guy in Singapore contacted me on whether I could do his centerpiece models. So this guy is more of a collector rather than a
Mm.
gamer, but occasionally he games. He plays AOS. So at the time it was 40K. So he asked me to paint up a display level Abaddon, the despoiler. It was new at the time. Yeah. So I realized, hey, I could hobby and do it for some money. So I started it. But I would say be careful when you take commissions to any commission painters out there. Um, when it comes to money, things get a little sensitive, especially when people want a different style, but you have a certain style. Like maybe people want a gloss finish, you want a matte finish. You prefer to do a matte finish, so people get a bit unhappy. Yeah, but in general, I think yeah, commission painting is just a way to have some side income.
But you went like pretty hardcore into painting, right? Because I think Felix and I could say the same thing is like we just want to get models done. I mean, we improve along the way, but we're not aiming to be a display level painter. We just want to get armies done, and would never have the patience enough. I mean, my painting has improved over the years just by repetition, but I've never wanted to push myself to the point that wow, I want to have a very beautiful army or stuff like that, because always I start out, okay, I'm gonna paint a beautiful army as my next army. I paint it halfway and I tell myself this is taking too long. I just want to get it done. So I sort of dropped my standards and just contrast and all that, right? So
Yeah, I
how
think
mm,
yeah, the difficulty with the painting hobby in general, I think, is you have very little dopamine hits, like every time we go out and game, we can have a dopamine hit every day, right? When we go out
mhm,
and game. But with painting, you maybe have that hit once every month
at the
when you
very
finish
end.
an army. Yeah, so
At the very end of the project.
yeah. But
You're like,
I find with painting at some point after doing some armies for War Machine, I wanted to paint something nicer, something long lasting to put on my shelf. So it started out like that. Um, so mainly I watched some YouTube channels like the Warhammer TV YouTube channel and Vince Ventrella from Ohio. Yeah, so after watching, I got a bit inspired. So I just tried my hand and it was very interesting to me. Yeah.
I guess at that point of time when you're not playing a specific game system, so you're not trying to get models on the table, that sort of puts the timer off, right? So it's like I'm just gonna choose one beautiful model that I like, and I'm just gonna do my best at it. So there was no deadline, there was no pressure to get it done. So I think that's where you can say, oh, okay, I'm just gonna try my best and paint that one model. Is that how it started?
Yeah, so it started with some of my War Machine models.
Mm,
Yeah, but at the time also it was quite a special time, and this was about 6 years ago, I believe. The painting scene on YouTube was starting to explode a bit.
right,
Yeah, so there were a lot of resources. So for a painter, it was the best time you could start.
right. And the
Yeah,
painting
so
channel for our hobby, right? This wargaming hobby, the painting channels are actually the most successful because it's agnostics of game systems, right? And every wargamer wants to paint better. So if you notice the YouTube channels, the subscribers and the view counts, it's all the painting channels that's doing very well. All right, with that, let's move on to the next topic, which is to share about the recent tournaments that Felix and I both ran in our respective cities. I'll let Felix go first. You're running this tournament on behalf of Kara Brown, right?
yes, this will be the third annual we had. We call it so. It's the spring version of a tournament we have in December called the Gem City Massacre. Dayton, Ohio, its nickname being the Gem City. So Gem City Massacre, I don't know where we came up with that name, but to do the spring one, we call it the Mayssacre. So it's the Gem City Massacre. So this is the third year in a row we were having that. And Kara Brown, who's a member of the Kings of War community here in Ohio and the Midwest, was the region chair for the Midwest Masters Council. She got diagnosed recently cancer. And so in order
Oh
to
dear.
allow her back to kind of work on healing and recovering and all that stuff, I was like, you know what, I'm going to help run this one tournament. So Just ran it this past weekend. We had 20 sign up, but with people drop, it happens with all tournaments. Folks drop. I think we ended up with 16 players. So still not bad for a one-day tournament. We had 16 players from as far away as Michigan, like 5-hour drive in Michigan. We had folks from Indianapolis, which is about around 2 hours away. And the folks from Columbus were like an hour and a half away. So we had a fairly decent
5 hours, that's a 10 hours round trip, right?
Yeah. Or I think 3 hours is the most I've ever driven for a one-day tournament.
Right.
I think that's been 5. And then we also had folks from Northern Kentucky, which might as well be Cincinnati, Ohio. So it's like a 45-minute drive for those guys. But we had, 16 players from 4 different states just fit in it. So that was really nice. I kind of I like to chalk it up to people just like me wanted to, go to a tournament I was TOing. But I think a lot of it is because the way our tournament year for Masters qualification for the Midwest, it goes from basically April to the end of March, which is Adepticon, the final kind of tournaments that we can get qualifying scores in Adepticon. And then normally we don't have much really until, end of summer, because we usually have Masters. And so folks are getting ready for US Masters in July. Well, US Masters this year is in September. So there's really nothing.
Right.
And so July is still open because nobody is going to plan for a GT to have when they know it's probably going to go back to July the next year. So, so a lot of folks, and actually I think 3 or 4 players are on the Midwest Masters team played in this one day. So, so yeah, pretty interesting. Although I did like that kind of a couple of the other players had maybe this is their 3rd GT, don't go to GTs all that often. So it was nice to kind of see that sort of mix of kind of top level players and newer players. So
right, it was held on the weekend of the 18th or 19th of May, right?
Yeah, it was on the 19th of May. So
Sunday.
it was one player on a Sunday, mainly because it's kind of one of the easier days for us to get at our local store, Epic Loot in Centerville, Ohio. We usually just ask them like, hey, when's a good day? And generally Sundays is pretty easy for them to, give up the day because a lot of 40K and Infinity stuff tends to happen on Saturdays. So
do you have to pay the store?
No, I don't believe we do. We usually do in terms of buying we'll buy gift cards and stuff like that as prize support.
Right.
I don't think we need to pay money to reserve.
What's the capacity? How many tables can they run at the time?
A week, we had the capacity to run 10 tables once.
Right.
Like I said, we had 20.
Why it was capped at 20, right?
Yeah, well, it was capped at 16, but when that sold out literally the day we opened up registration, we were like, went back to the store, like, is there a way we can get a couple more tables to bring in? So I said, yeah, right. we could bring 2 more tables in. And so we brought in 2 more tables, but ended up not needing those. But
so it's 3 rounds for 16 players. Did 2 players end up? 2 players end up undefeated.
I think did end up undefeated. I'm trying to remember what the final rounds were, but yeah, I think it did end up with 2 players undefeated, which is what.
And one of them won based on the tournament points. What system
did
you guys use?
Sportsmanship, painting, and stuff like that. The winner was Jeff Franz, who's a player from Indianapolis. He had this is like a Shogun themed Twilight Kin army. So Oni and all like Oni themed. Cool. I guess that's what I describe it. Oni themed Twilight Kin army. Very beautifully painted.
Very nice. Very nice.
Yeah. So yeah, that's the problem is like, yeah, you're right. With 16 players, 3 rounds is going to end up with multiple undefeated players, but really there's not much you can do for one day unless you wanted to have that thing stretch on for 12 hours.
Right. Do you guys have any special rules or scenarios or objectives to spice things up?
For the Mayssacre, not too much because it's so soon after the end of the previous season and a lot of players are starting their new. I guess the closest thing we might have is we don't really go too hard on the paint rubrics. Knowing that some players are just starting off new armies and may not have much painted up, 2 months after the season ended, so that one we don't really. Other than that, it's kind of bog standard out the book. I pick scenarios based off of what I kind of wanted to have scenarios done, and then we have scenario points, but that's not really Yeah, no special characters or any of that stuff in terms of making things stand out different. It's kind of your bog standard, kind of out the book tournament.
All right. No, nothing wrong with that. Here in Singapore, we kind of run that all the time. Basically, because, I mean, as a small country, you don't have that many tournaments, so everyone is just fine running things out of the book. Right, with that, anything else to add, Felix, before I jumped into my tournament?
No, I mean, if anyone who actually came to that tournament, I thank them for their attendance. It was a really fun event to kind of just, yeah, for me, a lot of it is just seeing other folks from the tournament scene that, I get to see maybe once, twice, a year or whatever. It's kind of nice to see them again. So it's like I said, appreciate all of them for attending and hope they can come back at the Gem City Massacre in December and then back again next year for the Mayssacre.
So we ran this tournament called Return of the Kings. I volunteered to sort of run the whole thing, but it's split into 3 tournaments, so I couldn't attend the first 2. So I had co-TOs to help me run the 2 days, which is on 21st of April and 12th of May. Okay, so we do collect the entry fee that goes to the store, and in return, the store also provides prize support. We decided to do something simple, just go with blackjack scoring and no withdraw, no allies. Because we have a lot of new players, so we did not require painting and just reasonably represented units, because we know that new players like to experiment with a lot of stuff. They might not have very specific models to represent everything, so just make it recognizable. This tournament was off the back of Clash of Kings Asia, which happened in January. 22 players attended in total. And right after that, there was a lot of local buzz because, we posted our pictures on Facebook and all that we went to Malaysia to compete. And so a lot of players began, from other game system, AOS, X-Wing, began taking notice of Kings of War. So we had a huge spike in new players. And so our store can only run 8 to 10 players, 4 to 5 tables, right? So when we posted up registration, it sort of exploded. So we decided, okay, how can we do this? I was discussing with the store. We talked about renting a venue, but we decided that is just too much work because the entry fee would go up very significantly, and there's still a lot of logistical issues. Sometimes you rent a venue, but they still don't have 6x4 tables. So you still have to rent tables on top of that. And then you have to transport the terrain from the store, the terrain and the mats from the store and back. So that's just too much work. So in the end, we've decided to run 2 8-player qualifiers for new players. So we also want the new players to not feel like they're going to get seal clubbed. So we ran 2 8-player tournaments that's only for new players. And each tournament will have the top 2 going into the finals. So the finals will have 4 new players battling out for the King of the Youngbloods. And so we have 6 more slots where the veteran players, initially including myself, will be competing as well. So the finals will have 10 players, 4 new players and 6 veterans. We kept the chess clock pretty easy, 65 minutes per player, but we only start the clock after deployment and after scout. So only when the first player starts to turn, because sometimes I find that the back and forth during the deployment can be a bit clunky, especially for new players. They're not used to it. Right. One last thing was a tournament reroll. So I came up with this rule at Kings of War, Clash of Kings Asia. The rule was once per game you can roll 1 die of a nerf roll. So I noticed that some players might be using it to a certain advantage. Like, let's say I need 10 to route the unit twice, right? So I rolled 10 the first time and I rolled 7 the second time. But in the second roll, it was a 6 and a 1. So a lot of players was like, okay, I'm gonna reroll the 1 because if I get a 4+, I would route the unit. So I thought that wasn't the intention of the reroll. So in this format, I only allowed the reroll on the snake eyes, and you reroll 1 die also. So most of the time, you only used it when it's supposed to be anything but snakes to kill the unit. Then you would do it, right? And to make it a bit more thematic, as you can see, the name of the tournament was called Return of the Kings. So it's a bit Lord of the Rings inspired. So I decided to include one of the most iconic phrase in the movie, which is "You shall not pass." So I asked players to do that. But I heard from the qualifiers, nobody actually shouted it. So in the finale, I was the TO. So what happened was one of our new players, and I think Felix, you know this person, Lam, he couldn't make it to any of the qualifiers. So I decided, he's a new player. He wants to play. So I said, look, you can get to play in the finale tournament, but you will have to play in the veteran bracket because you did not qualify, right?
Right.
So with that, Gad might not be able to make it. He's in some sort of a amateur basketball team, which might make it to
Right.
the finals, which clashed on the same day. But in the end, he chose to compete in Kings of War. So with that, I was like, okay, no worries. Let me drop out. I'll just focus on TOing on that day. Because this tournament was sort of planned since February or March. So I had a lot of time to sort of ideas pop up in the back of my head. So I started to add a lot of funky stuff in the background, not known to the players, but I felt that, I've been adding all this funky stuff and then it would just be weird if I play in it. It's like orchestrating your own party and playing in your own party, sort of something like that. So I was like, okay, no worries. Being a very competitive player myself, so sort of I had to convince myself a little bit, but I was like, okay, no worries. I will just drop out to fully compete. So this is one of the things that I did. I sort of went full ham on dressing up on team. So it started with you shall not pass. So I thought that the players should have a staff. So I bought these components off of online stores. The staff is actually a curtain rod, retractable curtain rod. I bought fuzzy dice and a foam dice to put on top to form the staff. And this crown, it's an elven tiara, and I bought toy snakes to put on it. This crown would eventually be given to the player who rolled the most snake eyes. So that's why he has a crown of snakes, right?
Fair.
And last minute, I bought this cape online as well. It was delivered one day before the tournament. So I've decided to go more thematic with it. Yeah, and
Nice.
this was the start of the tournament. TOing today, going all out with costumes and props. Gonna have a good day of gaming. Got over here. Hello. They were deploying. Everyone was deploying at the time. All right. So just a sweep of the tables. Oh, this is
It's nice to see Gad blotting out the light.
He is huge. So you can see the store has 2 levels. So this is the gaming level. Downstairs is the store level.
Mm-hmm.
And space is a premium in Singapore. We're a very tiny country. You can drive anywhere in Singapore within an hour. That's just to give you a gauge of how big our place is. But we have 6 million people. So space is a big premium in Singapore. So even this gaming store is considered having quite a big gaming space. Because I think the official Warhammer Games Workshop store doesn't even have a full table. Do you know, KJ?
No, I'm not sure. I think I had a demo game there once, but it was just maybe a half table.
Yeah, just a half table. Even the official Games Workshop store doesn't have a proper gaming table. Not even one. So this is the deployment. And I realized that I kind of take this kind of shots, overhead shots of the whole table for my battle reports, but you can't see the individual units in its full glory. So with that, because I'm TOing, right, I have nothing better to do while I'm waiting around for the rounds. So I did snap a lot of close-up shots. So I was quite happy with that. I think players will be happy to see some of their units in action. So let me share another screen which has all the close-up
Like, oh,
shots.
that's how I mess up deployment. That's how I made that. Yeah, there you go.
We had a new player. He's been playing ogres, and like on the final week, he decided to swap to play Northern Alliance, which is quite brave of him. But he was so excited. One thing I miss being a new player about the game, I mean, being a veteran Kings of War player, like trying to support Mantic, I've been trying to make all my army projects Mantic models. But as a new player, you see the gleam in their eyes when they're like, oh, I can use this model to represent that. I can use this range. I could do this. The modeling opportunities when they had picked from all over the range. So this guy, he had a ton of Star Wars Imperial Assault minis, which is already defunct. It's a defunct game from Fantasy Flight. So he had a ton of it. So he repurposed all of it for Kings of War. So his fluff was that they got lost. They went into a portal and ended up in Panator. So banded
As you do.
together to defeat all the fantasy creatures. So you can see a bunch of Jedi. Those were Naiad and Snarers. These are Tauntaun Riders, I think.
Does that be Frostfang?
Yes, it's a Frostfang Horde against Enslaved Guardians, which was Sigmarines. So when I took this picture, I said this is the battle of the IPs.
Right. Yeah. Battle of the IPs. I like it.
This guy, the player's James, he commissioned his army to be painted, and it was delivered on the morning of the tournament. So we're like, oh yes.
It would have been awkward had it not been delivered.
Guards, Tidal Swamp, the otters as usual. Pretty cute. So I like to feature them. These are KJ's ogres. All of them have face paint on them, huh?
Yeah, some like the Uruhai thing.
Yeah, gotta get the one with the face paint in.
It's the giant. Where's this model from?
I think it's a D&D model.
Right.
Yeah, it was a half price one at the store, so I just bought it.
Right.
There you go.
Gets 2. I think it's a forgot what he ran this as. Funny enough, I think this is Steve Huru's army. Our store owner, Alex, like to buy completed armies online, and I think this is Steve Huru's.
Maybe.
We also have Rob Berman's Salamander army in the store.
So the UK is just supplying your guys' store.
Supplying to Alex. He likes to buy completed armies. This is Keith's signature monochrome undead army. New players, right? So some of the stuff are primed. We're not very sticky about that. This is from Star Wars also, but I don't know these creatures.
Loath Cats.
Right.
How do you want to pronounce them? Yeah.
Yep, I'll just scroll through the pictures. Alex's elves, which I think is from Steve. KJ's ogres, Trident Realm. He bought a treasure chest to put his army in.
That's a cool idea. I'm not gonna lie, that's a cool idea. The treasure chest.
Yeah, yep. The Twilight Kin, yep, the Star Wars army. Everything except the Ice Elementals are Star Wars, I think. They had Stormtroopers ran as Ice Kin Hunters. I was explaining to the opponent, they hit on 4s. Then the opponent was saying, you mean they missed, right?
Yeah, but to say it's like they can't be that accurate, you know.
This is a nice shot to the Tauntaun Riders versus the Soul Flayers. Right, just quickly scrolling through. Yeah, so took some cinematic pictures. Otters against Butchers. All right. I'll just quickly share another thing, which is forcing them to do their cinematic rerolls. Here we go. It's one of the cinematic rerolls. I need to optimize for video. And so the boxes will come out. So I need to remove the boxes.
19 moons with Dread on Terror. Yes, Your Honor. Yes! Yeah!
I was really hoping for that 1 in 6 chance of it being another one again. Gotta just
quite surprisingly, a lot of them.
Yeah, I mean it's a 1 in 6 chance, so like, you know.
Is it still shared? Is the screen still shared?
Yes.
Oh, yes. Hero 4+, double 1. I need him to not roll 4+, because that was a mistake. Hey, you shut up, boss! Come on!
Hero.
All that embarrassment just to have the same result.
He said refund the staff. Wait, let's see another one. Dragon's Breath. I think it's this one.
Fire breath. Dragon breath. 8 wounds on the river guard. What should I say? You shall not pass. You shall not pass. Reroll 1 dice.
I have 7 videos and I think 3 of it was a 1.
That's funny. Yeah, I mean that's now that you'd mentioned it, we had a tournament reroll at the Mayssacre. Normally it's $5 to buy the reroll, but we take that money and donate it to a charity. So so it's a fundraising thing.
You can only buy 1 reroll, right?
Right, you buy 1 reroll, but it's a reroll per game. So
you have $15 for 3?
For the $5.
Oh, just for the 5, right?
Yeah, so I mean it's a 1 die roll. So it'd be on a deck or whatever.
Yeah.
So.
All right.
Here, 13 wounds with Brutal on the Soul Players, caused by the bots.
By the void skins.
Down! Don't pass!
Like more, oomph into it. Maybe that was
Yeah,
what
I said
like
you have
that.
to go all in.
Guys are like, that's not a good acting job. You're cursed. You're getting a 1 again.
Yeah. So I even told them we will pause the clock for the reroll, so you
Nice.
can go all in. Yeah. So yeah, I think it was quite entertaining throughout. I think KJ, even when when you hear the neighboring table doing the reroll, do you sort of pause and watch it?
Yeah, of course, but our clock was running, but I still watch it. It's so entertaining.
It's entertaining.
Especially when they re-roll back into a 1.
the anguish.
Yes.
Yeah, that happened at this was Mountaineer GT in 21. I like to say Bart Kohler was against, I forgot who he was playing against. Did that whole thing, or rolled snake eyes, used a turn reroll, rolled another one, and he was just so loud, like he just was just screaming in anguish when he rolled the snake eyes. It was amazing.
Like before the tournament, I was toying with the idea of just making the snake eyes into a 3 without the need to reroll. So if you turn a snake eyes into a row of 3, which makes it, purely just to cancel out a snake eyes. But then we just thought that, if you remove the chance element, it will not be as fun. So it's like, okay, reroll 1 die.
It's not nearly as entertaining.
Yeah. And I think that was just enough to spice the game up. We did run scenarios out of the book. I think most players are still kind of in the mode of just wanting to play competitively and all that, but
Right.
just those scenes happening every now and then sort of lighten the mood and inject a little bit of fun. I did want to give like rousing speeches before each round, but that didn't come because firstly, round 1, right, there were a few players late, so we're like running late already. So, and I had to start the tournament with some of the players not arrived yet. So I was like, killed the mood. So
yeah.
And then because of the late players, and then they went for lunch late and they came back from lunch late. So in a hurry to get round 2 started, and then round 3 was already kind of late. So I was like, just give a simple speech and just, yep.
Yeah, I think
so
not adding the clock to deployment also lengthened the game quite a bit because people were taking a long time to deploy.
Oh
Right.
yeah, some players took a long time to deploy, I think. So next time, this is meant, partially for new players, so I didn't want to make it tough for them. So just to round things up, tournament winners, KJ won first place. It was pretty interesting because at the start of round 3, Dawei, which is the young blood champion, he won 2 rounds against the new players, right? So he was going into it with 2-0, while there were 3 other players which were 1 win and 1 draw. So KJ being one of them, James being one of them, and the last one was Keith being one of them. Right, so turned out on the round 3, the top tables drew again, while KJ had a sizable win on table 2, so he leapfrogged over table 1 to claim the champion. So congratulations, KJ. When we ran the tournament, we also split the new players into 4 teams, and each would have a coach, a mentor. KJ is one of the mentors, so I thought it would be you build a bit of camaraderie there. That as a new player, I have some teammates. We can discuss tactics back and forth, and there will be a veteran player guiding us. And so the best placed teams in the qualifier, the coach will be awarded best coach, and that's Johan over here. He couldn't make it to the finals, so I passed him the whistle, just one day before the tournament. This is Dawei. He won King of the Young Bloods. I bought a actual metal crown to put on his head, and he hemmed it up. Love it. Yeah, when I bought the crown, I realized when it got delivered, yeah, it is actual metal, but from far you couldn't really tell. So actually, the more intricate design the crown, the better. I thought I would go with a simple look. And this is him wearing his crown in the final round. That was when he was near the end. He was about to land a draw against opponent James, which is a veteran. So he was pretty happy about it. It was a winning draw, so I think the attrition was 1 point in his favor. But the scenario was draw. A lot of prizes to give out. I gave a best sports award, which is actually a staircase tool, and I there wasn't budget, so I homemade the staircase too. They were just spare bases I have lying around. I just glue them together into a staircase, but it works. Best spots, every player would vote their favorite opponent based on sportsmanship. So Keith and Sean were tied on two best favorite opponent votes. Best team, so this is the combined score of the young blood members with their coach's standings. And KJ won 2 awards. First award is lead by example. The best placed coach, since he won first, is a best placed coach. So zoom in on that headband over there.
You wore that on the train back, right? Please tell
No,
me.
definitely not. I brought my crown home, and my wife called it a tiara. So
yeah, that takes a little bit of the fun out of it.
And Alex won most snakes. Yep, and that's the end of the tournament. So with that, let's talk about injecting the fun back into fantasy, the fantasy back into fantasy, right? So one thing I noticed myself as a player, so I thought about it in my head, and I asked KJ, because we shared the same ride home on the subway. So like, I was asking him, when we were preparing our armies, when we were thinking about the game, we imagine cinematic battles, epic scenes in our heads, especially when we're painting out our dioramas. But the moment we hit the table for our games, for me, it just turns into chess. All right, this piece is going to kill that piece is going to do 6 damage to this, I'm probably going to hold, and then I'm going to do this, I'm going to flank. Nothing about bows hitting orcs, or bowfire hitting orcs, or swords clashing against shields. None of that imagery comes into mind. They just become chess pieces on the board. So I was wondering if, by and large, it's the same for most players. So I think KJ, you mentioned that it's the same feeling for you when you play.
yeah, currently yes, for Kings of War. So largely, I think it has to do with immersion in terms of seeing the units for what they are. Like you're saying knights and archers and all that. I think one big part of it is there's no removing model casualties in Kings of War. You just remove the whole unit. So I find the act of removing model casualties really help in a player picturing the battle scene. So games like Napoleonics, right? Historical games, they remove ranks. So you kind of picture, your men dying and then the men at the back stepping up to take their place. But in Kings of War, it boils down to numbers and a die roll, basically. Your nerve value and 2 dice, right? So another thing that breaks immersion, I find, but I think it's just the nature of the beast. Kings of War is balanced for this reason. I think it's unit flavors. So in other games, there are a lot of faction-specific things. So for example, in Kings of War, we have Bane Chan. Everyone has Bane Chan. But I think in other games, maybe one faction is themed around setting other units on fire, things like that. So that also helps to sell the game in terms of the lore. But of course, it's not easy to balance these things. What else?
Yeah, I think like Games Workshop's games, 40K or AOS, they have very differently named rules, but they're actually the same thing, but they're just themed after the army that the rule is for.
Yeah, I was listening to Countercharge, and during the Dwarf Army review, I can't remember who, but someone mentioned quite an interesting thing that I think is quite fluffy also. Like, for example, the Warsmith, currently not a very good unit, but let's say what if he has an ability to make one war engine ignore stealth. Ignore stealth and ignore cover, but just one war engine. So you kind of get the feeling like, he's pointing his periscope at one target and then commanding one war machine to shoot. So I think it's quite, something like that would be flavorful. But then again, balance might be an issue. So what else? I think where I get the fantasy feeling the strongest is when I hobby, like you said, when we make dioramas picturing our armies in that environment. But yeah, it just becomes chess the moment we play.
Because both of us played War Machine and Hordes before, do you get the same feeling for War Machine?
No, sorry. Yeah, War Machine, there's much more of a fantasy feeling because the casters all have different spells, right? It makes things a bit more interesting. And then
a bit more flavorful.
Yeah, like for example, like let's say Butcher Tree, what we mentioned just now, in the lore, he's really tough. He basically killed an entire village. And on the table, he does the same thing. So I think unit identity in Kings of War is not as good. So we can draw an example from sharpshooters and Redkins. Was it claw shots?
Claw
Or
shots,
long
yeah.
shots? Yeah, long shots. Yeah.
Claw
So they are
shots.
basically the same unit. It's just the numbers are just a little different. So there's nothing really to make them stand out. Both factions have access to the same tool. I think something quite interesting are things like mop-up in comparison. So we're talking about range units here. So things like the mop-up launcher, you can give a unit the dog, Yeah, so those elements help sell the lore or sell the fantasy feeling of the game.
Right. Like what I did for the tournament, like leading up to the tournament, I keep sending snippets of Lord of the Rings videos into the chat just to get them hyped up. I did send, like, in my tournament announcement, I did add quotes from Lord of the Rings. I don't know if that helped, KJ. Did it rouse anything in you at all? You can be honest.
Yeah, I think between the games, yes, but during the games again.
As
Yeah,
in
like,
before
I
the
was trying
games,
to play the game.
in the chats, when I the way I
Oh,
typed out the
yeah.
announcements.
Yeah, definitely. There was a bit of hype generated. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Glad to know that helped. I think locally the most immersed player is Gut. You get to see him go, oh no! It's like, go Otters! He screamed this kind of stuff every once in a while. So I think he's the
Yeah,
most immersed.
playing against him is probably he's probably one of the most enjoyable players to play against because
Entertaining.
he doesn't really care about the clock. He doesn't even look at the clock. Yeah, he just starts yelling out things like that.
He came late, right? So I rolled for sides for him for the table. He was playing
Yeah,
Trident
man.
Realm. And
I
then
mean,
I was like,
standard
God,
affair,
choose a
right?
side. You know what Gad said? He just said, of course I'll choose the side with the water. It's like there was no tactical reason behind it. It was just,
Right.
I'm Trident Realm. I'm going to choose the side with the lake.
Yeah, he forgot his Gigas doesn't have Pathfinder behind.
Right. Felix,
Nice.
what about what can
I
you
mean,
observe from whether your local players or just American players in general? Do you think they're very immersed in the fantasy elements when they're playing?
well, problem is that a lot of the stuff, I mean, you're tying that in tournament scene. And so obviously, like you said, Gad's very immersed into the stuff, but he doesn't pay attention to the clock. And unless you want these tournaments to last forever, you kind of have to have a time element.
Mhm.
And I think in a way that's kind of why a lot of us it goes down to, you're talking about just stats on the page and stuff like that, because you're looking at your clock. I need to make sure I get this stuff. Only time I've ever really been like, yeah, this is something cinematic to have, and generally when it's like a snake eye situation, or I think we've all experienced that one character that for some freaking reason will not die. No matter what you throw into that unit or your opponent has, that character just will not die. He just happens to end the game running away, just kind of thumbing his nose at you. And so it's kind of stuff like that. Not so much for like the clash of shield walls and stuff like that as the battles go on. But I do think a lot of it is just time. Like, you've only got 65 minutes per player to play a game. My brain shifts out of the whole, let's get,
Yeah,
let's get
you're a
funky.
pretty fast player, right? So I think
I make
even
bad
if there was
decisions
a
quickly.
clock,
That's admitted.
it wouldn't put much pressure on you to play your game, because you still have ample time to play your game.
Right.
But is it just because there's a clock element that
I mean, I use that
takes the
time.
immersion out?
I use that time to use the bathroom, buy snacks. I really am
Grab
not.
a beer.
Yeah, I'm not really doing that. Yeah, it's tough because for me, like I said, it's all those outliers that they usually make for the best stories. I mean,
Yeah.
it's hard to be like, ooh, about that stuff when your Hearthguard regiment murders like the 8 billionth thing it's gone into in a combat in a game with that army. It's just like, okay, yeah, that's what they do.
Right.
But yeah, I think I hadn't really even thought about that until you broached that when we were on After Dark one of the times. Like, yeah, you're right. I really don't. Now, whether or not even half of American players, are the same way, I don't know. Idea. I mean, we're a large scene with a lot of players, stretching from coast to coast.
Definitely, but you too have been to a lot of major tournaments.
Right.
Do you see that odd narrative, not narrative, but very immersive player every now and then? It goes, oh, my unit's herald against the oncoming tide. You know, the way that they describe.
Yeah, on
Again.
occasion, but yeah, I don't see that as often, which
Right.
might be a thing within the tournament scene. And whether or not more of your garage gamers, as we call them, the ones that don't ever go to tournaments, they just sort of stay at home and play with their buddies. I can see that a little bit more casual because, you know, that's that games where you show up at your buddy's house, you guys share a 6-pack of beer or whatever while playing the game. That's, you know, 3 hours later. I know Eric Trowbridge, former U.S. Master from 2020, he'll do those like 6 to 8,000 point games with his buddy Roger and
Right.
spend 5 hours drinking and playing a 6,000 plus point game of Kings of War. I imagine that's probably a little more narrative because it is the grandeur of I forgot what size table they play it on. I think it's 2 of the 6x4 foot tables put together. So it's
right.
You have a lot more of the visual spectacle of which I think you can sort of get that little more in the mindset of it when you just see these mass battle lines, you know, strung out along a table. That's a little more, I guess, visually immersive or visually evoking that fantasy image versus, you know, maybe 30 units between the 2 players, you know, on a normal, you know, 6x4 table. It's not nearly as grandeur as but yeah.
I think my next question would be like, okay, so seems like it's quite consistent. Singapore and US players, maybe it's the tournament scene or whatever it is. It's not that immersive into the fantasy when we're playing the game. My next question would be, is that a problem? Do you think it's a problem? Or everybody's just fine playing this fantasy flavored chess with some dice rolling, you know?
No, it's not a problem. Definitely not a problem. I think the simplicity of Kings of War make it easier to balance and creates quite a friendly environment because often we see, you know, you watch some streams of like Warhammer tournaments, the guy gets wiped on the first turn, right? What fun is that? So I think the simplicity of Kings of War really lends itself as a tournament game, right? And you cannot help but players feeling competitive about it and maybe viewing it a little like chess. So I don't think it's a problem. I think it's just Kings of War as compared to the old world, right? Old world, it's much more of a fluffy game, but then people decide to become competitive with it, and then it just kills the fun. But Kings of War, you can have fun and still be competitive at the same time, I feel.
Right.
I do like, and I think it's been described before, Kings of War, it allows you to play the game versus playing the rules, and you can kind of throw whatever you want out, pull whatever you want out of it. If you want that very, like you've said, chess with a couple extra steps kind of game, or you can be very casual and play those, you know, epic siege games, you know, thousands of points on the table and all that stuff. And the rule set allows for both, which is nice. I would hate to have a game where you had to really stretch it out to make it a, you know, an immersive tabletop experience, or the vice versa, or to really hammer a game to make it a tournament friendly game. So I like that it can do both.
Yeah, not bringing a rule book to a tournament is really refreshing. Yeah, you don't need a rule book for Kings of War. The rules are simple enough that, you know, any like page that DO can answer any questions. We don't have to refer to rules all the time. Yeah, and it contributes to the fun a lot because who likes bringing like 3 books to a tournament, right?
And flipping it through during the game.
Yeah.
Like you only need your opponent's list. Sometimes you don't even need your opponent's list if you're familiar enough with the game and the opponent's list.
Yeah, that's one thing I do like about the tournaments when sometimes you do have a minor rules question, but just like between you and the table next to you, you guys are able to figure it out because you'd be like, hey, what's going on with this? They'd be like, oh, blah, 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 blah. And you're like, oh, okay. Like I said, it doesn't require like a rules lawyer and bringing out the books and stuff like that. It's generally, I think, especially amongst the tournament scene, like you've learned a lot of the rules and some of those minor interactions and stuff like that. And yeah, I think on Sunday, Was I called in for anything rules wise? No, not really. There was just an interesting situation that I wanted to document so I could talk to the RC about it, but it wasn't a rules confusion. It just looked weird on the tabletop in terms of when you have, I'll describe it. Basically, when you have, say you have 2 units on the hill, and it looks like they block line of sight, but they're not 50% on the hill, so they're technically not on the hill.
Right.
So they technically can see things behind the hill and not block, because otherwise if it were on the hill they'd be height 5 and would obscure the height.
So you can see the unit once they pull a hill, but they are not considered height 5, right?
But they're considered on the hill, so the hill's just height 3. You can see the one thing, even though visually it doesn't look like you would be able to see the height 4 thing behind the hill, but you can, because that's why I just documented that, just to kind of like, oh, okay, it's not a weird rules interaction. It wasn't something that people argued about. It was just like, yeah, it's kind of funny that it kind of looked that way. But that's just when you have to remember these are simulations, so it's kind of an abstract of what reality would look like. So you just have to take that into mind. But yeah, I don't think there's any rules issues. I think if folks had questions, it was generally you're able to generally resolve at the table. And then hell, I mean, I think we've all been to that point where it's just like, oh, this looks too close. Do you want to just flip a coin? You roll a dice, 4 up, it's this, 1 to 3, it's that. I mean, I think we've all been there. It's like, you don't need a TO for that sort of rules resolution,
Yeah, so I guess everyone's fine with Kings of War being what it is, but I guess with all the dioramas, the display board game in US is pretty crazy. So
it's insane is what it
people
is.
still enjoy the fantasy of their game, right? But maybe it's more gotten from the hobbying aspect. I play this army, it becomes chess on the board, but once the game is over, sometimes you talk about each other's miniatures, right? Wow, how do you do this? Wow, I love your team. I love what you did with your army. And that kind of happened in our local tournament too, especially during the lunch break. Everybody was, because we voted for our favorite army as well. The Star Wars army won for its creativity. Yeah, but everyone was like appreciating each other's hobby work, and I think everybody still appreciates good, nicely done hobby, right?
Well, I mean, when we talk about the US Masters, I always love how people will say like, oh, this guy is a US Masters player, like as like a shorthand for, oh, they're a good player. I mean, maybe. I mean, hell, I've been to Masters, but like what I've noticed is it's always like it's into thirds. Like the top third, about a third of the players at Masters like want to do really well. They want to, possibly try to win. They want to help their, region get best region, whatever, The other third is, they're just, it's a party. It's, it's an opportunity to drink, have the man vacation away from the family and play a game, And the other third's like it's a painting competition, or it's a painting competition with gaming on the side, So you get those crazy display boards, those beautifully painted armies that, I mean, the players are good. I mean, they're certainly not bad players, but that's not their focus. Their focus is the hobby aspect of it. So maybe if you can introduce that fourth contingent of people that are there for the narrative gaming. I know it's something that, even though I appreciate the narrative and the lore of Panathor and Kings of War and stuff like that, with my own army, I'm sort of lacking, I guess. I don't. I love the ones when people do the army review, not reviews, like army list matchups and stuff like that, and their army list, every single unit has a name.
Yeah.
Like that's cool. I mean, I just don't have I tried that for, I think it was Adepticon last year for my halflings. They all had different regimental names because it's like I had it like a militia organization, I think, and then the aeronauts were basically from a different regiment that were out. They were the attachment for my mainly infantry based army. But I
mean that adds the flavor to your army, right? That gives you a little bit of immersion. How however small it is.
Yeah, that's kind of the most I'm thinking about.
So there's a head canon going in your head about where these units are from.
Right. Well, KJ is probably the same way. Like when you're painting the army, how you build that head canon of like, okay, well, why is this regiment Why is this particular unit? Why are they this?
Why are they red?
Why
You know,
why are
what
they
the
yeah,
face
yeah,
paint
definitely.
represents.
The ogre tattoos represent something, things like that.
Right.
Represent kills. As you play more games, you add one notch.
Oh,
Right.
do you do that?
Not yet, but I'll do it for my ogres. Yeah.
Right.
But I think for Kings of War, it's much easier to get immersed in a hobby because of the basing, right?
The
You
diorama.
don't have to have your miniatures painted very nicely. You just have a nice base and it looks fantastic already. But whereas I think other game systems, the base isn't as significant. So if your miniature isn't as nicely painted, it's quite obvious.
Mm.
Yeah,
Right.
and like your Green Lady army in your background, you add water effects to a horse. I mean, the horse inside is not painted, but the water is part of the terrain, right? So it looks fantastic anyway. Yeah,
Mm.
I think it's much easier to get immersed.
Yeah, I think one of our players, Johan, did this. He had ogre standard bearer, and I think once the standard bearer did amazing feats against your dwarfs, I think. And so after the battle, he added a dwarven shield on his ogre standard bearer.
Oh,
Was it
I
you?
think he did something like that.
Yeah.
No, not me.
Not you, another dwarf
No.
player.
Yeah,
Yeah. Then after that,
probably Gaddafi.
I think it
Probably
held
gave
back a horde or
easy.
something like that. So he added a
Uh,
shield, and then I think it did something amazing again. So he wrote something on the banner. So I
Yeah,
think
I
stuff
think
like
for
that
me
you could hobby.
it's hard to, especially because when you're playing the game, it's hard to remember those, especially if you're doing 3 games in a day. If something that amazing happens round one, what, 6 hours and how many beers later, I'm not gonna remember, what happened turn 2 of turn 3 of round 1. So that's a part of it too, which means I should probably take more photos of my games. But
Oh, if it was epic enough, I think you might remember something like
right.
the opponent needed to kill the standard bearer and overrun into the dominate circle, and then he wrote Snake Eyes, so your standard bearer just held the whole horde back.
Right.
That would be memorable, and
yeah,
that
sometimes you
caused you
don't
to
have to
win.
remember. Your opponent brings it up every now and then.
They bring it up for you. Yeah.
Yeah.
You know that one time I would have won if I did not roll Snake Eyes against your standard bearer.
Yeah, that'll happen.
Yes, that happens.
Yeah, so I that is something I do kind of want to, I guess, bring out with my own army. It's just I'm kind of like Paige. I have a bit of army ADHD, so it's kind of like, what army am I gonna play this week? I don't know, and so it's hard to, I guess, get attached to the army as a whole, or even individual units, because it's like, oh, I might have a horde of ice naiads this week, and the next week, they're gone. I'll just go try human tribesmen. Or it's like, oh no, I'm gonna do that ice elementals, So, but yeah, I think that's something we could maybe as a community sort of like, well, I think just even a podcast like this just to bring up the discussion points, because like I said, I hadn't thought about it until you mentioned it. It's like, oh,
Yeah,
I guess you're right.
yeah. It sort of came like it sort of hit me a while back while I was preparing for this tournament. When I was not playing in it anymore, then I got the chance to step back and think about it as a whole. Like, how can I enhance the experience of this tournament?
Right.
And so I wanted to go all in on giving rousing speeches and mandating the acting when you want to reroll. And I
Right.
think that was just enough to keep things interesting for the players other than the game itself. Like, I think they remember a few of the iconic stuff slams, whether because it was acted out well or because it rolled into another one.
Yeah, I think locally the Kings of War community is the loudest. It seems like, whenever so we always talk about like chess matches, right? But then every time, from my observation, when there's one Kings of War table beside I don't know, some Games Workshop game, right? It seems like we are always the loudest. And during tournaments, it gets even louder. So I
We
think
just shout
people
that,
generally,
oh,
yeah.
like everyone
I
was just
think
like, oh,
maybe,
okay. I can't believe you wrote that well. All right, okay, no, good
yeah,
luck. And then, and it was all very mild and tame. Wow.
yeah.
Mm.
Kings of War, with the moment you roll a double one, there's always yelling. Yeah, things like
There's
that.
always yelling at the double one.
Yeah.
No.
Who knows? It could
So
be a product of not having a rule book around, right? You don't have to keep referring, killing killing the fun of it, right?
You're
So
very immersed into the game.
The flow is, yeah.
Although it's a
Okay.
chess game, at least you're very immersed into it.
yeah.
But yeah, we had, so maybe to kind of help cement those memories of those kinds of moments. So some scenario points we have are like, one of the scenario points for like a game like Dominate is have one of your units in your opponent's deployment zone. So you're obviously not scoring towards Dominate, but it's a scenario point. So it's kind of one of those. Well, two of the scenario points I had for the one day was kill a unit that needed a 10 or more on the nerf check. Or the other one was fail to route a unit that needed a 4 or less on the nerf check. So it's like, that's sort of like just the winds of luck and just either doing really well or failing horribly in terms of your dice rolling. Maybe the
those
way
who
to
wrote poorly the first round, they all went, okay, guess I'm going for the double ones prize, the most double ones prize. Not knowing that it was the crown that was on my head all along.
I've seen a number of tournaments do the recognizing who rolled the most snake eyes. That one's a fairly easy one. Just people just have to keep track of how many snake eyes they roll.
Yeah, just at the end of the game, you kind of remember most of the time.
Yeah,
at the end
it
of
was
one
at
game.
It was at Mountaineer in 21. I'd like to say I rolled, I think, 4 or 5 snake eyes in game 1. It was just like crap. But then I didn't roll like any snake eyes again until like the final game of the tournament. I'm like, how? Why? If we're gonna be bad luck, just be bad luck the rest of the just let me get most of the snake eyes instead of just having them all in one game. It was like, come on.
Alex, who won it, he wrote 4 snake eyes in one game. He didn't roll any snake eyes in the other 2.
Yeah.
Granted, we counted the tournament reroll into a snake eyes as 2 snake eyes.
Oh, okay.
So he wrote 3 actual snake eyes in the game.
Right. Well, I mean, I guess, but it's interesting because, how many nerf checks do you roll in a game? I mean, his probably did average out to being 1 per game, but then he just, did it all in one versus, spanning it out throughout, 3-game period. So,
yeah, there was a time back when I was doing battle reports that I counted the number of nerf checks in the game, and it's often in the 30s. Because you have like on average 14 to 16 units. You need to roll twice to break a unit most of the time. So that would come up to about 30 rolls as already on killing the units. And of course, there are earlier nerf checks where you pling some wounds. Right. So it always adds up to 30 plus. So snake eyes is 1 in 36. So on average, yes, there should be 1 snake eyes every game.
Right.
Yeah, on average.
Yeah. You just want to have them in the early on, which is like, oh, I need a 10 twice to kill this thing. Oh, snake eyes. Okay, cool. Knock that one out of the way.
Unfortunately, it doesn't work that way. We always say that, right? We always say get it out of the way early, but that doesn't reduce your chances of rolling snake eyes again.
Right. But at least in your head, you've got the bed off. You're like, all right, I got that. All right, cool. My dice they've woken up now. They don't have to worry about that anymore. But yeah, you're right. It doesn't.
It's often that, when I wrote snake eyes on an insignificant nerf check while my opponents wrote snake eyes on the most critical one. And then at the end of the game, I could say, well, I wrote snakes too. Just happened to be
it's that recency bias and the bias of like, well, this didn't matter.
Yeah.
It's like when your opponent, all their crap dice luck are at the end of the game after they've murdered your army turns 1 through 4 through shooting or whatever. It's like, oh yeah. See, I rolled a snake eyes, but yeah, it's like, yeah, you snaked the 1 remaining unit I had in my army. That's a pretty insignificant snake eyes,
Yeah.
So yeah, it happens. Yeah.
Any ideas in your head of just increasing the amount of fun fantasy wise for Kings of War? I did run a Hellpeace Rift campaign about 3 years back when Hellpeace Rift the book launched, and it was pretty fun. I think I sort of captured lightning in a bottle back then. I wrote narratives. I wrote like a weekly or bi-weekly newsletter to describe the events of the world, because we split the players into 2 teams, and then I weave the narrative of the game results that they played throughout the weeks into a cohesive narrative of what's happening in the world as they're chasing down Hellpeace Rift. And then we played 8 weeks, so each plane lasted 2 weeks. There were 4 planes, right? So each plane had different rules. And then the final battle was pretty interesting. It was a 4v4, 1,300 points each. So that's 4,000, 5,000, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5,000 and 200 points per side. And then we had some points were earned on both sides. So you use the points to buy stuff, including buying heroes. And you could buy the special, and there was a leveling up system. So each player had a unit that can character that can level up, and a unit that can level up. So the general and the bodyguard. So it's pretty interesting. And then you could buy the general of the players that couldn't make it to the finals, to the finale.
Right.
Yeah, it's pretty narrative. There was a castle in the center back when there was no siege rules. It was defense 7. And you know what everybody brought?
Hammer of Measured
Hammer
Force.
of Measured Force.
Nice.
Screw you guys.
Right. So one thing I was just thinking about in terms of, one thing that I've done too, just to sort of break out the rut of playing tournament scenarios all the time, because that's generally, we roll up on our Friday night gaming, like, what do you want to play? It's like, well, roll out of the book, There's actually quite a number of resources. I know Mark Cunningham from the UK, he's got a ton of scenarios he's written up for his GTs over in the UK, and it's just, one of the ones I had was super fun. I was like, this isn't balanced at all for a tournament game, but it was basically loot. But at the beginning of the game, every loot token had a giant on top of it. And the giant had random movement,
right,
direction, and distance, and had Slayer and Rampage. And if it ran into your unit, it attacked your unit. So just like playing loot, but just a random murder machine, 3 murder machines just running around the battlefield, like.
Was the giant carrying the loot token? That means you have to slay the giant. Right.
No, but it's just
it
like
just started on top of the token.
It just started on top of it, but you so you can't jump on the unit. You can't jump on the tokens round 1. At least, if you wanted to, you kill the giant, maybe take it, but as you move towards the token, the giant either could just walk the other direction and, I don't know, go hit your opponent, or they can attack you. And, so you really had to. So just scenarios like that, I think, can kind of break you out of the rut of playing a tournament specific scenario.
And I think there's tons of resources on Dash 28. I know Greg writes a lot of custom scenarios and posts it up there.
Right.
The Helpy's Rift campaign that I ran, I posted the whole thing up there. So for people to take a look on the leveling system, how each plane went, how did I run the finale, what are the special rules. We had the castle, and then after the castle was destroyed, then there was random surges of energy. So we had to roll a scatter dice. And if you're hit by it, you just take a lot of piercing shots. Yep. So
yeah, so it's honestly probably stuff like that, because like we mentioned earlier, just the time in the scenarios for tournaments, that kind of takes away from your ability to just sort of kind of let the imagination soar. But we're not always playing tournaments, so
yeah, I think and I think Rob
play those other scenarios, kind of judge it up.
Yeah, I think Rob from Countercharge did mention he wanted to do a massive narrative event. Was it this year or next year?
It was. I thought it was supposed to be this year.
I think so too, because I think they were talking about it since the last year. So
they've
maybe we could look forward to that.
Yeah.
KJ, what do you think of running a narrative event in the near future?
I'll consider it depending on how many new players we have, because I think more veteran players tend to prefer competitive play. So if we get another wave of new players, probably a narrative event would be good.
Right.
Yeah. One thing that I remember, this is years ago, gosh, before the pandemic, so 84 years ago or something like that. Remember they had the international campaign days?
Yeah.
Like those were fun.
Was running for Asia.
Yeah, I really enjoyed those. I know it was a very intensive, and that's kind of why they kind of have stopped doing them. But those were fun. And you're kind of as you're going to your gaming. At least I was going to my gaming store. I was kind of seeing, what was going on in Asia, and then I was kind of seeing what was going on in Europe, because I was going to influence what was going to happen in North America. So that was kind of a neat, as the day wound on, you kind of got to see the story evolve, and that was really cool. You kind of felt like I was part of, felt like your army was part of that. If the forces of good one or whatever, or the forces of evil one, you felt like you were a part of that. So it's stuff like that. But I mean, it's obviously it's a time and labor intensive thing. But I do miss those international campaign days.
I do miss the Helpis Ridge tournament that I ran. I mean the campaign that I ran. I think that was lightning in the bottle. Everybody was pretty involved, enjoying.
The finals were amazing. The 4v4 game.
Were you playing in it? Or that
Yeah,
time you
yeah.
haven't? You were.
Yeah, I think opposite me was Keith also.
Ah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So a lot of memories. And I think leading up to it, it was less competitive play. So I think at the time the community was relatively young, right? Not a lot of veteran players.
There were a few. Still around the 6 to 8 veteran players.
Yeah, I
with
think
many more
an
young
event
ones.
like that would be nice. Maybe around this timing, because in January we have our Clash of Kings Asia, right? So everyone maybe the 3 months before will focus on tournament play. But
Yeah.
before that, I think people will enjoy something like that a bit.
Yeah. We'll definitely consider that. Well, that's been a nice discussion, everybody. So anyone has anything else to add to this topic before we close out the topic?
No, I'd like thank you for inviting me. This is a pretty fun discussion.
Right. So let's just wrap out by doing a round of hobby updates. I'll go first. Before that, I'll announce that in Singapore, we're hosting what we consider a big tournament because it's 24 players, because our game store Hammer House is renting a venue to run a festival, weekend festival. So it'll be a 2-day tournament in October, 26th and 27th of October. So anyone around the world who is thinking of coming to this event can reach out to me. I'll get you registered and all. Okay. Entry fee is pretty cheap at 25 Singapore dollars. That's about 15 to 20 US dollars for 2-day event. So, yep, and we are considering, because the venue rented is pretty big, there'll be multiple game systems of tournaments being run. But if registrations are overflowing past the 24, we might possibly extend it to 32 players, depending on signups. So, yep, people around the region, Australia, even, or if you just happen to be thinking of traveling down to Singapore or nearby around this timing, can consider this tournament. For myself, let's do a bit of hobby sharing, hobby updates. I am starting my Northern Alliance army. Two things that I like to try in this army. One is, I wouldn't call it cell shading, but I wanted to give it a bit of a comics book style look. So what I did is I outlined most of my units. And I did it the lazy way because I can't be bothered with brush control using a fine tip brush with black paint. So I just bought a black pen that's quite fine tipped, and I just used the pen and drew all over the model once I'm done painting it. So you can see the lines here. The reason why I wanted to do this, because I was thinking like Northern Alliance is always snow themed, right? So the basing, the theme is already very fixed. Is that you can't really run that far away from the snow theme. It will look strange once it's not a snow theme, because they're wearing furs and all that, right? So the other element that I'm adding into this army is to have it Mongolian themed. So whilst trying to stay mostly Mantic, so I'm using Mantic models with just a head swap, 3D printed Mongolian heads. So this is my standard bearer, or not the bearer, the Thane with Telenar standard. So the rest of it is Mantic except the banner and the head. Ice Queen is still just Mantic. Regiment of Frost Claws, or this took a long time to outline because of all the feathers. Drew all the feathers on. So I don't know if... So halfway when I started painting on the units, I sort of gave up. I only outlined the front rank. The rest I didn't outline. The back rank, I was like, no, can't do this.
That's the page Neo I know and love. Like, okay. Yeah, this is good enough for the front rank. Yeah.
Yeah. So after this picture, I realized the white furs are pretty obvious. So the back ranks, I only did the first. I only outlined the first. Whereas the front rank, I outlined the whole model, because like each model will take about 10 to 20 minutes to outline. So you multiply it by the entire army, that's a lot of extra time spent on the army. So I was like, nope, not going to do that. Especially after my previous army was goblins. Now my Northern Alliance is unfortunately very infantry heavy as well. So it's like, no.
Like your infantry, what can I say? Just like your infantry.
Countercharge is running a slow grow. I've completed my first month's task, 300 points, which is this Regiment of Hearthguard and this Snow Fox added together. Past 300 points. All right, let's quickly move on to KJ. What hobby updates you have to share?
So currently I'm doing up my free dwarf army, redoing up my free dwarf army. Yeah, so I'm just doing the basing now.
What do you mean by redo?
Oh, wait a minute. I can't see it.
I put it in front of your face. It will show when you put it in
Okay.
front of your face.
Okay. Yeah, some autumn basing. Yeah.
Pretty nice.
Yeah, redoing because my first army was a full mantic dwarf army, but I sold that away. And then now I'm redoing another one with non-mantic models. So I meet my quota of mantic models first, and then I do another army.
Yeah,
Yeah, 'cause
I mean, your halflings were also mainly mantic, and your ogres were also mainly mantic.
ogres maybe 70% mantic. Yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty high already.
Yeah. For the dwarves, I just don't like the Brock models. So after I finished them, played a few tournaments with them, and I sold them off. So now I'm redoing my Brock army.
Okay, with alternative sculpts
Yeah, riding on bears this time.
from which line?
Highland miniatures.
Some
I think they're quite popular for playing
King of
the
Lush
oval
Beast?
with.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so a lot of models are scaled to the oval, which is suitable for mantic anyway.
Mm.
Yeah.
What's the unit in the oval? I don't remember old world
No.
dwarves having
So
cavalry.
the mainline infantry, but they did some extra stuff. So the mainline infantry, like the hammerers, the warriors, yeah, all suit. They're sort of based on the old GW cover art. So they took the
Right.
cover art and make it into 3D sculpts. And then they added some stuff like the gyrocopters are a little different, a little more medieval looking, I guess, or more Viking looking. And then they have dwarves riding on bears also. Yeah, so
Awesome.
just decided to do that one.
Can't wait to see another army from you. How long do you think it'll take the army project?
Hopefully by Lion City Brawl, I can bring that army.
Ooh, October.
Yeah. Still quite a ways away, so I think okay. Should be okay.
Right. Felix, what about you?
I'm working on a friend of mine. He just retired from the Army National Guard, which is our kind of territorial home guard sort of militia type, organizations for the U.S. military. He just retired last month, so for his retirement gift, I'm painting his Marauders firefight army. So because the man does not like to paint, and I was tired of playing against half an army being bare gray plastic. So I'm like, listen, brother, I am painting your firefight army as a gift so I can play against something painted. So and then probably at some point I need to nail down a list I'm going to take for US Masters and work on that if I need to. So yeah, that's future Felix problem.
Just a side note, I think Kings of War as a community, we kind of play mainly with painted models more often than other game systems. Do you agree with this statement?
Yeah. yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely the communities, at least when it comes to tournaments, when it comes to the casual stuff, okay, yeah, if you're just going to try throw an army on the table to practice running against it, sure, that's fine. But yeah, for tournaments, yeah, we the general expectation is you paint your army. So
right. Awesome. Anyone have any last shout outs before we close out the show?
No,
I just want to say thank you, Paige, for organizing the local event. Yeah, very nice
thank
event.
you. Glad you enjoyed the event. That's the highest appreciation, right? That's the best I could hope for, is that everyone enjoyed themselves. Really think back about the tournament with fond memories. All right. With that,
thank you for
I think
inviting me.
that's a show, guys. It's a wrap. Thank you for coming on short notice once again, and I will not have content for the next 3 weeks. I'll be in the US, traveling with my extended family, my family, my brother's family, my two brothers' family, my mother-in-law, for 3 weeks of holiday. LA, Las Vegas, and Utah, because my big brother stays in Utah. All right. With that,
Safe flight.
Bye everybody.
Okay, bye. Nice to meet you, Felix.
Yeah, nice to meet you too, KJ.